The sun was setting over the Chicago skyline as Richard Morrison watched the city from the window of his office on the 30th floor. The skyscrapers reflected the orange sky, creating a spectacle that he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the computer screen, analyzing numbers that would determine the future of his development company. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter has called for the third time today," said Martha, his secretary, interrupting his thoughts. Richard sighed, running his hand through his graying hair. "Tell her I'll be home in an hour." "But sir, her ballet recital starts in 30 minutes. The businessman looked at his watch and cursed under his breath. He had promised little Beatrice that he would be there this time. After missing 3 birthdays and countless school presentations, he had sworn he wouldn't fail again. Cancel the meeting with the investors. Say a family emergency came up. As he drove through the congested streets of downtown Chicago, Richard felt the weight of the guilt he had carried for 5 years since Elise, his wife, had passed away due to a sudden illness. The void she left transformed him into a different man, cold, methodical, obsessed with work. The only connection with his former self was Beatrice, who at 9 years old was the spitting image of her mother. When he arrived at the school theater, the presentation had already ended. On the empty stage, a girl in a pink tutu sat alone, swinging her legs in the air. "B, I'm sorry," said Richard, approaching cautiously. "You promised, Dad," she replied, without raising her eyes. "The teacher asked where my family was. I was the only one who danced without anyone watching." The words hit him like knives. Richard sat down next to his daughter, trying to find the right words. "Work got complicated and—" "It always gets complicated," Beatrice interrupted. "Aunt Helen said Mom never missed any of my performances." Helen, Elise's sister and Beatrice's godmother, was a constant presence in her niece's life. Unlike Richard, she always found time for the girl despite her schedule as a university professor. "Let's go home. I promise I'll make it up to you." On the way, Richard observed his daughter in the rearview mirror. She hugged her worn teddy bear, the last gift from Elise. The silence between them seemed like an insurmountable abyss. When they arrived at the mansion in Gold Coast, they were greeted by Mrs. Connie, the housekeeper who practically raised Beatrice. "The poor child hardly ate dinner," she commented, giving Richard a disapproving look. "I'll be home early tomorrow, I promise." "You always promise." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stared at the empty side of the king-size bed, recalling his daughter's words. The company he had built with so much effort consumed every minute of his life, and he allowed it to happen. Morrison Development was about to close an international contract that would completely change the American real estate market. But at what cost? For the first time in years, Richard questioned his choices. He got up and walked to his daughter's room. Beatrice slept, hugging the old bear, with a serene expression that he hadn't seen on his own face for a long time. On her bedside table, he found a pencil drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a radiant sun. "My family," said the childish caption. The figures represented Beatrice, Helen, and Mrs. Connie. Richard wasn't in the drawing. At that moment, something inside him trembled. His daughter was building a family without him. He needed to change, to regain Beatrice's love and trust before it was too late. What Richard didn't know was that fate was preparing a twist that would forever change the lives of everyone in the Morrison mansion. The sun was already high when Richard woke up, a strange sensation enveloping him. For the first time in years, he had turned off his cell phone during the night. He went downstairs still in his pajamas and found the kitchen empty. On the refrigerator, a note from Mrs. Connie informed him that she had taken Beatrice to school. 9:30. "In the morning," he muttered, looking at the clock. "I missed 3 important meetings." Strangely, he didn't feel the usual anxiety that came over him when something escaped his control. He prepared coffee and sat at the table, analyzing the silent mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. The white walls, the imported furniture, the cold marble under his bare feet, everything there screamed professional success and personal failure. The house phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Richard, why is your cell phone turned off?" Anthony's agitated voice reverberated through the device. "The Japanese have been waiting for you here for an hour." "I had a family issue." "Issue? Richard, this contract represents everything we've worked for over the last 3 years." "Reschedule for tomorrow," he replied dryly. "Say I had an emergency." After hanging up, Richard felt a freedom he hadn't experienced in a long time. He took a long shower, dressed in casual clothes, and decided to do something he never imagined: pick up his daughter from school. When he arrived at the school, he was surprised to see the empty courtyard. At the secretary's office, he discovered there was a field trip to the Chicago History Museum that day. "You signed the permission slip last week," the secretary explained, confused by his own confusion. Once again, Richard realized how disconnected he was from Beatrice's life. He drove to the museum, determined to find her and spend the rest of the day together. The Chicago History Museum was bustling with children from various schools. Richard walked through the historic corridors looking for Beatrice's class until he heard a melodious voice telling the children about the Great Chicago Fire. And it was here that the fire started, which would destroy much of the city in 1871. The children listened attentively, including Beatrice, who smiled, fascinated. The speaker was a young woman of approximately 28 years, curly hair tied in an unpretentious bun, brown skin and vivid eyes. She wasn't wearing a museum uniform, but coordinated the group with natural authority. "Daddy!" exclaimed Beatrice upon seeing him running in his direction. The young guide interrupted her explanation and looked at Richard with curiosity. "Mr. Morrison, what a surprise," she said, approaching. "I'm Gabriella Sanders, an education history intern. I'm assisting with the field trip today." "You know my dad?" asked Beatrice, intrigued. "Only by name and photo. Your teacher showed me who the parents of each student were for safety reasons," explained Gabriella, smiling. "We didn't expect to see you here today." Richard felt out of place, as if he were an intruder in his daughter's school routine. "I decided to surprise her," he replied, uncomfortable with Gabriella's evaluative gaze. "Daddy never comes on field trips," commented Beatrice with childish naturalness. "He's always too busy for these things." The innocent comment hit Richard like a punch. Gabriella noticed his discomfort and intervened. "How about joining the rest of the visit with us, Mr. Morrison? We're about to see the exhibit on the World's Columbian Exposition." During the next 2 hours, Richard watched admiringly as Gabriella led the children with a mix of discipline and enthusiasm. She transformed historical facts into fascinating stories, encouraged questions, and treated each child with genuine interest. "Are you a teacher?" asked Richard while the children had a snack in the museum garden. "I'm finishing my master's in education. I intern here and at Beatrice's school as part of my research." "About what?" "The impact of parental absence on children's educational development," she replied, looking at him directly. Richard swallowed hard, feeling exposed. "Gabby tells the best stories, Dad," interrupted Beatrice, pulling Gabriella's hand. "She promised to teach me how to dance like the princesses of the 19th century." When the field trip ended, Richard surprised everyone by offering Gabriella a ride. "I live far away in the south side," she hesitated. "It's not a problem. Today, I have the day off." On the way, Richard noticed how much Beatrice transformed around Gabriella. His daughter, usually quiet and melancholic in his presence, overflowed with joy and curiosity. When they arrived in the simple neighborhood where Gabriella lived, Richard felt an inexplicable impulse. "Would you like to work for us?" Gabriella blinked, confused by Richard's sudden proposal. "Work for you? What do you mean?" "As Beatrice's private tutor," he explained, observing her reaction. "Mrs. Connie is already of advanced age, and I need someone who can accompany my daughter in school activities, homework, and who can be present when I cannot be." "Which is practically all the time," commented Beatrice, swinging her legs in the back seat of the car. Richard gave her a look of reprimand through the rearview mirror, but he knew his daughter was only stating a fact. "I'm finishing my master's degree, Mr. Morrison," replied Gabriella thoughtfully. I would need to balance the hours with my university classes, and I'll pay you double what you receive at the internship, he interrupted, accustomed to solving everything with money. And you can live with us in the room adjoining Beatrice's. Sweet. Gabriella hesitated. The proposal was tempting from a financial standpoint. With what she would earn, she could help her mother, who was raising her 2 younger brothers alone in Pilsen. Additionally, access to a private library and time to study while Beatrice was at school would be significant advantages for her. Research. Please, Gabby, begged Beatrice, grabbing the young woman's arm. It'll be so much fun. We'll dance, tell stories, and you can teach me all about the queens. The girl's genuine enthusiasm deeply touched Gabriella. In just a few weeks of interaction at school, she had grown fond of the child who, despite all her material privileges, showed a glaring emotional neediness. I'll think about it, she finally answered. I need to talk to my family and my advisor. 3 days later, Gabriella accepted the proposal. The move was quick. Her belongings fit in just 2 suitcases. When she arrived at the Morrison mansion, she was greeted by a suspicious Mrs. Connie. I hope you're not thinking of taking my place, young lady, muttered the housekeeper as she led her to the room. Not at all, ma'am, replied Gabriella with a gentle smile. I'm here to compliment your work, not to replace it. The sincere response seemed to momentarily placate the elderly woman's fear, who had served the Morrison family for 15 years. The initial adaptation was challenging. Richard still arrived home late, but now he found his daughter animated, recounting the day's adventures with Gabriella. History lessons transformed into improvised theater in the living room, math lessons applied in the kitchen while baking cookies, or dramatic reading sessions before bedtime. In a few weeks, Gabriella's presence transformed the mansion's atmosphere. The once silent walls now echoed with laughter. The kitchen exuded the smell of homemade cakes, and even Mrs. Connie, initially resistant, found herself smiling as she watched Beatrice flourish under the care of the young tutor. One Saturday morning, Richard surprised everyone by announcing he wouldn't go to the office. I thought we could take Beatrice to the park, he said during breakfast, avoiding Gabriella's surprised gaze. But today, we have ballet class, protested Beatrice. We can go to the park after class, suggested Gabriella, noting Richard's genuine attempt to get closer to his daughter. Your dad can accompany us and then watch you practice the steps you've learned. During the outing, Richard observed the interaction between Gabriella and his daughter with a mixture of admiration and envy. The young tutor naturally possessed what he struggled so hard to regain, Beatrice's trust and love. How do you do it? He asked when they were finally alone while Beatrice played on the carousel at Grant Park. Do what? Make her smile like that? Gabriella looked at the girl whose face was radiant with joy, and then at Richard, noticing the vulnerability in his usually cold and calculating eyes. Presence, Mr. Morrison. It's not the quantity of time, but the quality. Beatrice doesn't need expensive gifts or international trips. She needs to be seen, heard, valued. The words hit Richard like a revelation. He had spent years buying expensive toys to compensate for his absence, without realizing that the most valuable gift he could offer was his time and attention. That afternoon, for the first time since Elise's departure, Richard watched a complete ballet class of his daughter. He observed each movement, each expression with concentration, recognizing traits of his wife in Beatrice's graceful gestures. On the way back home, Richard's cell phone rang incessantly. "Aren't you going to answer?" asked Gabriella, noticing his hesitation. "Not today," he replied, turning off the device. "Today is family day." The word family hung in the air, laden with meanings. Gabriella felt an inexplicable warmth in her chest, but quickly dismissed the thought. She was there as an employee, as Beatrice's tutor, not as part of that fragmented family struggling to reconnect. What she didn't know was that that simple outing in the park would mark the beginning of a profound transformation in the Morrisons' lives, and that destiny was preparing surprises that none of them could predict. Chapter 4. Storms Ahead. The peaceful days at the Morrison mansion were abruptly interrupted by an unexpected call. It was an ordinary Wednesday, and Gabriella was helping Beatrice with her science project at the kitchen table while Mrs. Connie prepared lunch. "Miss Gabriella, phone for you," announced the housekeeper, extending the device with a concerned expression. The voice on the other end of the line was trembling and broken by sobs. It was Mary, Gabriella's mother, desperate. "Daughter, Luke is in the hospital. He fell from the roof while flying a kite and broke his arm in 2 places. They need to operate, but the health insurance is denying coverage because we're 2 months behind on payments." Gabriella felt her blood freeze. Luke, her 12-year-old brother, had already faced health problems in the past, and any complication could be serious. "How much does the surgery cost, Mom?" "Almost $20,000. Honey, we can't afford it." Gabriella took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Her first salary as Beatrice's tutor hadn't been paid yet, and her savings barely reached $5,000. "I'll figure something out, Mom. Don't worry." Upon hanging up, she found Beatrice and Mrs. Connie looking at her with concern. "Did something serious happen, girl?" asked the housekeeper. "My younger brother is hospitalized. I need to leave for a few hours," replied Gabriella, mentally, calculating how long it would take to reach the hospital in the south side. "I'm coming with you," declared Beatrice, jumping from her chair. "No, dear, it's a complicated situation and—" "Please," insisted the girl, "you always say that true. Friends are present in difficult moments. I want to be your true friend." The sincerity in Beatrice's gaze completely disarmed Gabriella. Mrs. Connie, sensing the gravity of the situation, intervened. "I'll drive you in my car. Mr. Richard's driver is off today." During the journey to the public hospital, Gabriella fought against tears while trying to explain to Beatrice in simple terms the challenges her family faced in Pilsen. The girl listened attentively, her eyes revealing an understanding beyond her years. At the hospital, they found Mary and Gabriella's younger brother, Peter, 8 years old, in the waiting room. Luke was already being prepared for emergency surgery, which the medical team had decided to perform even without the guarantee of payment. "How are we going to pay for this, Gabby?" whispered Mary, hugging her daughter. "I'll figure something out," repeated Gabriella, although she didn't know how. To everyone's surprise, Beatrice timidly approached Mary. "My mum was in the hospital too," she said, holding the lady's hand. "But I'm sure your son will be okay. Gabby says not all stories have sad endings." Mary smiled through tears, touched by the empathy of the little stranger. Gabriella introduced Beatrice and Mrs. Connie to her family, feeling completely different worlds colliding in that hospital corridor. As the hours passed, Beatrice enchanted Peter with stories she had learned from Gabriella, transforming the anguishing wait into moments of distraction. Mrs. Connie, in turn, insisted on buying coffee and snacks for everyone, demonstrating a generosity that surprised Gabriella. When the doctor finally appeared to inform them that the surgery had been successful, everyone breathed with relief. However, the financial issue remained like a dark cloud over them. "The hospital administration wants to talk to you about the payment," the doctor informed Mary. At that exact moment, Gabriella's cell phone rang. It was Richard. "Where is my daughter?" he asked with a tense voice. "I came home early today and didn't find anyone." Gabriella quickly explained the situation. To her surprise, instead of the expected scolding, Richard replied, "Send me the hospital address. I'm on my way." Less than an hour later, Richard arrived at the hospital, impeccable in his dark suit. His gaze immediately sought Beatrice, who was sleeping peacefully on Mrs. Connie's lap. Upon spotting Gabriella, he walked determinedly in her direction. "Why didn't you call me immediately?" he asked, more concerned than irritated. "I didn't want to bother you with my personal problems," she replied, sustaining his gaze. Richard observed Gabriella's simple family, so different from his own. He saw in Mary the same determined look as her daughter, the same dignity despite the adverse circumstances. "How much does the operation cost?" he asked directly. "Mr. Morrison, I didn't ask you to come here and—" "How much?" he insisted. Reluctantly, Gabriella revealed the amount. Without hesitation, Richard took out his cell phone and made a bank transfer to the hospital, covering not only the surgery, but also leaving an additional amount for medications and recovery. Consider it an advance on your salary, he said upon noticing Gabriella's confused look. You can pay it back in monthly installments if that makes you feel better. The unexpected gesture left Gabriella speechless. Mary, understanding what had just happened, approached Richard with teary eyes. Thank you, sir. God bless you. No, need to thank me, he replied, visibly uncomfortable with the display of gratitude. Gabriella is important to my daughter, and apparently Beatrice also cares about her family. On the way back home with Beatrice asleep in the back seat, a silence laden with meanings hung between Richard and Gabriella. Why did you do that? She finally asked. You could have simply sent for Beatrice and left my family to solve their problems alone. Richard remained silent for a few moments, as if seeking within himself the answer to that question. Because I saw my daughter sleeping peacefully in a public hospital after hours consoling a family she barely knows, he finally replied, and I realized she learned that from you. The following weeks brought a new dynamic to the Morrison mansion. Richard started coming home earlier, at least 3 times a week. It wasn't rare to find him in the library, helping Beatrice with math lessons, or simply listening to the fantastic stories his daughter created. The change was subtle, but noticeable. One Sunday afternoon, Richard surprised everyone with an unusual invitation. I'd like you to accompany me to the family lake house in Lake Geneva, he announced during breakfast. Hey, it's been years since we've been there. Beatrice almost spilled her juice glass with excitement. Grandpa John's lake house, where there's the stream and the horses. That exact one, confirmed Richard, smiling at his daughter's reaction. Gabriella, you're invited too. I think Beatrice would like to show you the place. I don't know if it would be appropriate, Mr. Morrison, Gabriella hesitated. After all, I'm just Beatrice's tutor. You're more than that, interrupted Beatrice. You're my friend, please come with us. The girl's sincere appeal broke any resistance. That same afternoon, the 3 departed for Lake Geneva, with Mrs. Connie remaining at the mansion for a well-deserved rest, as Richard insisted. Blue Heron's Retreat was an impressive property, with a colonial main house surrounded by impeccable gardens and verdant pastures. Upon arriving, they were greeted by the caretaker couple, Mr. Tony and Mrs. Sophie, who had been taking care of the place for more than 30 years. Miss Beatrice, how you've grown, exclaimed Mrs. Sophie, hugging the child. The last time you came here, you barely reached my waist. It's been 4 years, Sophie, explained Richard with a hint of guilt in his voice. Since Mrs. Elise, the caretaker interrupted herself, giving a confused look to Gabriella. You are Gabriella Sanders, Beatrice's tutor, she introduced, herself extending her hand. Mrs. Sophie and Mr. Tony exchanged significant looks that didn't go unnoticed by Gabriella. Clearly, her presence raised questions about her role in that family. During dinner, prepared with care by Mrs. Sophie, Richard showed himself more relaxed and communicative than Gabriella had ever seen. Away from the impeccable suits and the corporate environment, dressed in jeans and a simple shirt, he seemed like another person. He told stories of his childhood at the lake house, of how his father, John Morrison, had built the real estate empire from scratch, starting as a simple construction worker. After Beatrice went to bed, exhausted from exploring every corner of the property, Richard invited Gabriella for a walk to the stream. This place is special to me, he commented, as they followed the trail illuminated by the full moon. It was here that I proposed to Elise. Gabriella felt a tightness in her chest. It was the first time Richard had spontaneously mentioned his deceased wife. Beatrice has her eyes, he continued, and the same free spirit. She must have been an extraordinary person. She was, confirmed Richard, his gaze lost in the gentle current of the stream. Elise was an art teacher at a public school when we met. I was starting at my father's development company, full of ambitions. She taught me to see beyond the numbers, to value people above contracts. The revelation surprised Gabriella. But the image she had formed of Elise was completely different. She imagined a sophisticated socialite, not an idealistic teacher. What happened to her? Beatrice never told me the details. Richard took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to relive. Painful memories. Cerebral aneurysm. It was sudden. One day we were planning our family vacation. The next, she simply didn't wake up. His voice faltered. Beatrice was only 5 years old. I couldn't handle the pain, the emptiness. I immersed myself in work to avoid facing reality. And in the process, I distanced myself from the only part of Elise I had left, our daughter. Silent tears ran down Richard's face. Gabriella, moved by an impulse, touched his arm in a gesture of comfort. "It's never too late to start over," she said softly. Richard covered her hand with his, the touch sending an electric current through both of them. For a brief moment, time seemed to suspend. They were too close, too vulnerable. Gabriella retreated first, aware of the complications that proximity could bring. "It's getting late," she murmured. "We should go back." The next morning, Beatrice insisted they visit the stable. While the girl fed the horses under Mr. Tony's supervision, Gabriella noticed an isolated space, closed by a locked door. "What's in there?" she asked Richard. "Elise's studio," he replied, taking a key from his pocket. "I haven't entered here since—" He didn't complete the sentence, but turned the key in the lock. The interior revealed an art studio preserved in time, easels with unfinished canvases, dried paint pots, sketches attached to the wall. In the center, a canvas covered by a white cloth. Richard approached with hesitant steps and removed the fabric. The painting showed a young woman with curly hair and a luminous smile, holding a small girl. The woman's face was incredibly similar to Gabriella's. "My God," she whispered, stunned by the resemblance. "Now I understand why Beatrice connected so quickly with you," murmured Richard, equally surprised. Unconsciously, she must have recognized. At that moment, Beatrice came running into the studio, interrupting the conversation. Upon seeing the painting, her eyes shone. "Mommy!" she exclaimed, running to touch the canvas. "And look, Gabby, she looks like you!" The innocent observation hung in the air like a revelation. Gabriella felt dizzy, confused by the implications of that resemblance. It was as if destiny had traced an inevitable path, mysteriously uniting those three lives. "I think we should take this painting back home," suggested Richard, looking significantly at Gabriella. "It's time to let the past enter our lives again, not as a ghost, but as a precious memory." As they returned to the main house, Gabriella felt her heart divided. The connection that grew between her and the Morrisons became increasingly complex. Was she replacing Elise, filling a void left by the mother Beatrice barely knew? And the feelings she was beginning to nurture for Richard, were they genuine, or just a distorted reflection of what he still felt for his deceased wife? The return to the Morrison mansion was marked by a reflective silence. The discovery in the studio at the lake house had awakened contradictory feelings in everyone. Elise's painting now occupied a prominent place in the living room, as if the presence of the deceased lady of the house had been officially restored. For Gabriella, the following days were of profound unrest. The physical resemblance to Elise weighed like an invisible burden. When she passed through the mansion's corridors, she felt Mrs. Connie's gaze evaluating her with a new perspective. Even Helen, Richard's sister-in-law who occasionally visited Beatrice, showed surprise upon meeting her. "It's impressive," commented Helen during a Sunday tea. "You could be Elise's sister." Richard quickly intervened. "Gabriella is Gabriella. The resemblance is just a coincidence." But was it really just a coincidence? The question echoed in Gabriella's mind as she observed the growing proximity between father and daughter. Richard now actively participated in Beatrice's routine, accompanying her on school outings, watching her presentations and even helping with homework. The tutor, who previously filled a void left by the absent father, began to feel displaced. One afternoon, while organizing material for the history class, Gabriella found Beatrice contemplating Elise's painting. "Sometimes I dream about her," confessed the girl. "In the dream she has your voice, Gabby. It's strange, isn't it?" The child's innocent observation hit Gabriella like an arrow. Was she unconsciously feeding a fantasy in Beatrice's impressionable mind, creating a maternal substitute that could never really be? "Beatrice, I need you to understand something very important," said Gabriella. kneeling to be at the girl's height. "I am not your mother. I can never be Elise." "I know that," replied Beatrice with surprising maturity. "Mommy is in heaven. You are Gabby, my special friend. But sometimes when you smile, it seems like she's smiling too." The conversation was interrupted by Richard's arrival, who wore a heavy expression. "Can we talk in private?" he asked Gabriella. In the office, Richard showed her an email on his computer. It was from the University of Edinburgh, offering a full scholarship for a doctoral program in child education. "How did they get my resume?" asked Gabriella, confused. "I sent it," admitted Richard. "Your advisor mentioned this opportunity during his last visit here, remember? He said it would be perfect for you, but that you probably wouldn't have the financial means to cover the costs." Gabriella felt a mixture of gratitude and indignation. On one hand, it was an extraordinary opportunity that she would never be able to pursue on her own. On the other, Richard's attitude seemed like a veiled attempt to distance her. "Why did you do this without consulting me?" Richard hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "I've observed how dedicated you are to your studies, how your face lights up when you talk about your research. This is a unique chance that can transform your career. It would be selfish of me not to share it with you." "And Beatrice?" questioned Gabriella. "How will she be if I leave like this? Suddenly?" "Beatrice will understand. She's stronger now, more secure. Thanks to you, I've reconnected with my daughter. I've learned to be a father again." A painful realization hit Gabriella. Perhaps her mission in that family was already fulfilled. She had been the necessary bridge to reunite father and daughter, to rekindle Elise's memory in a healthy way, to bring life back to that house. Perhaps now it was time to follow her own path. "I'll think about it," she finally replied. That night, unable to sleep, Gabriella walked to the kitchen to prepare tea. She was surprised to find Mrs. Connie sitting at the table with an open photo album. "Can't sleep, girl?" asked the housekeeper, indicating the chair beside her. Gabriella sat down, noticing that the album contained photos of Elise. "She was truly special," commented Mrs. Connie, pointing to a photo where Elise smiled broadly, holding a baby Beatrice. "She had a huge heart, but also a strength that few knew. She fought until the end to create an arts foundation for underprivileged children, even when exhaustion was already dominating her." "I didn't know about that project." "The Rainbow Foundation," confirmed the housekeeper. "Richard abandoned everything after what happened. It was too painful for him to continue." An idea began to form in Gabriella's mind. What happened to the foundation? "It's inactive. The resources are still there, invested, but no one had the courage to take over the direction after Elise." The next day, Gabriella sought Richard in his office. She had made a decision, not only about the scholarship, but about her future in the Morrisons' lives. "I want to stay," she announced with determination, "but not just as Beatrice's tutor. I want to take over the Rainbow Foundation." The proposal completely surprised Richard. "The foundation? How did you know?" "Mrs. Connie told me. And before you think I'm trying to take Elise's place, I want to make it clear, I'm not. I deeply respect her memory and recognize the importance she had for you and Beatrice, but I believe I can honor her legacy by continuing the work she started." Richard stared at her for a long time, as if seeing her in a new light. "And what about the doctorate in Edinburgh?" "I can do the research right here, with the children from the foundation. It would be a more relevant project with real social impact." A slow smile formed on Richard's lips. It was a different smile from all that Gabriella had ever seen, full of admiration, respect, and something deeper that they still didn't dare to name. "You really aren't Elise," he finally said. "You are extraordinary in your own way, Gabriella." Sanders. That night, as Gabriella helped Beatrice prepare for bed, the girl asked an unexpected question. "Gabby, do you like my dad?" The question, asked with the frankness typical of children, left Gabriella momentarily speechless. "Your dad is an admirable man," she answered carefully. "That's not what I asked," insisted Beatrice. "Do you like him, as the princess liked?" "The prince in that story you told me." Gabriella sat on the edge of the bed, seeking the right words. Beatrice, adult relationships are complicated. Your dad still holds a lot of love for your mother's memory, and that's beautiful and important. But I think he likes you too, continued the girl. He smiles more when you're around. And yesterday, when you left for your class at the university, he stood looking out the window until your car disappeared down the street. The child's perceptive observation made Gabriella's heart race. Could it be possible that Richard was developing feelings for her beyond gratitude and professional respect? Time for bed, young lady, deflected Gabriella, tucking in the covers. Tomorrow we have a full day ahead. As she closed the door to Beatrice's room, Gabriella noticed Richard standing in the hallway with an expression suggesting he might have heard part of the conversation. Their gazes met, laden with unformulated questions and unexplored possibilities. The reopening of the Rainbow Foundation became the project that further united the unlikely family forming at the Morrison mansion. For weeks, Gabriella, Richard and Beatrice worked together to restore the old warehouse in the Southside neighborhood that would house artistic activities for underprivileged children. The place was spacious, with large windows that allowed the entry of natural light, perfect for painting, dance and theater workshops. Richard surprised everyone by rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt and personally helping with the painting of the walls, something his former self would never do. "Dad, you're all splattered with blue paint," exclaimed Beatrice between laughs, pointing to the stains on her father's face. "And so are you, little artist," he replied, tickling his daughter. Gabriella observed the scene with a warmed heart. Richard's transformation was evident to anyone who knew him before. The cold and calculating businessman increasingly gave way to a sensitive and present man, not only for Beatrice, but for everyone around him. "I never imagined I would see Richard Morrison painting walls," commented Helen, who was visiting the place for the first time. Elise would be proud. The mention of the deceased wife no longer brought the cloud of sadness that previously hovered over Richard. Now he smiled when remembering her, sharing positive memories with Beatrice, honoring her legacy through the foundation. The big day of the inauguration approached. Gabriella had selected 20 children from Pilsen for the pilot project, including her brother Peter. Everything was meticulously planned: an exhibition with works by local artists, dance presentations, a small reception prepared by Mrs. Connie, who had enthusiastically involved herself with the project. On the eve of the inauguration, while giving the final touches to the decoration, Richard received a call that completely changed his expression. "I need to go to the office now," he announced, his voice tense. "An emergency has come up." Gabriella and Beatrice exchanged concerned looks. For months, Richard hadn't used that tone or prioritized work in that way. "Did something serious happen?" asked Gabriella. "Anthony just informed me that the Japanese investors are threatening to withdraw from the international project. If that happens, the development company will lose millions and we'll have to lay off hundreds of employees." "But what about tomorrow's inauguration?" questioned Beatrice with teary eyes. Richard knelt before his daughter, holding her hands. "I'll be here, Princess, I promise. I just need to resolve this crisis now." After Richard's departure, Gabriella tried to keep Beatrice's spirits high, but the young woman herself felt apprehensive. The old broken promises loomed like ghosts between them. Had Richard really changed, or would the first serious crisis make him fall back into his old habits? The hours passed without news. Night came, and Gabriella took Beatrice home, promising they would return early for the final preparations. At home, she put the girl to bed, noting the sadness in her eyes. "He will come, Bea," guaranteed Gabriella, although she wasn't sure. "And if he doesn't come?" asked the girl. "Like before?" "Your father has changed. Trust him." After Beatrice fell asleep, Gabriella went down to the kitchen for tea. She was surprised to find Mrs. Connie awake, preparing sweets for the inauguration. "The girl is worried, isn't she?" asked the housekeeper. "Yes, and to be honest, so am I." Mrs. Connie cleaned her hands on her apron and sat across from Gabriella. "You. No, girl, when Elise passed away, I thought this house would never have life again. Richard transformed into a shadow, and Beatrice was growing like a little flower without sun. Then you arrived with your rebellious curls and your stories, bringing color back. But don't be mistaken. It wasn't just because of your resemblance to Elise. No. No, it was because you are yourself, authentic, strong, determined. Richard sees that. Beatrice too. And I, who have seen a lot in this life, can affirm what is being born between you is not a shadow of the past. It's something new and genuine. The housekeeper's words deeply moved Gabriella. Since the discovery of the resemblance to Elise, she had struggled with the insecurity of being just a substitute, an echo of a woman she had never known. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was almost midnight. Mrs. Connie answered, and with a concerned expression passed the device to Gabriella. "It's from the hospital." Gabriella's heart froze. Her mother? Her brothers? "Hello? Miss Sanders?" "This is from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Mr. Richard Morrison was admitted to the emergency room 2 hours ago, victim of a sudden illness during a meeting. He specifically asked to notify you." The world seemed to slow down, Gabriella noted. The necessary information and hung up, feeling dazed. "What happened, girl?" "You're pale," exclaimed Mrs. Connie. "Richard is in the hospital. He collapsed during the meeting." "My God. And Miss Beatrice?" "She's sleeping. Let's not wake her now. It would only cause more anguish. Can you stay with her while I go to a hospital?" Mrs. Connie nodded and Gabriella left immediately. During the journey, 1,000 thoughts crossed her mind. What if it was serious? How would Beatrice react to another loss? How would she herself react now that her feelings for Richard were becoming increasingly clear and deep? At the hospital, she was led to the room where Richard was under observation. He seemed small in the hospital bed, connected to cardiac monitors. Upon seeing her, he tried to smile. "Sorry for ruining the eve of the inauguration," he murmured. "What happened?" asked Gabriella, instinctively holding his hand. "Exhaustion, blood pressure through the roof. The doctor said if I continued at that pace, I would have a heart attack." Gabriella felt tears forming in her eyes. "The foundation can wait, Richard. Your health can't." "I'm not going to postpone," he insisted, squeezing her hand. "I promised Beatrice, I promised you, and mainly, I promised myself that I would be different this time." The determination in his eyes was undeniable. At that moment, Gabriella understood that the love she felt for Richard went beyond physical attraction or admiration. It was a love based on mutual growth, on joint transformation. "Did the doctors say when you can leave?" "Tomorrow morning, if the tests are normal. They asked me to drastically reduce stress." A significant silence hung between them. It was Richard who broke it. "I've been thinking a lot about this, about what really matters, about what I want for the future." "And what do you want?" asked Gabriella, her heart racing. Richard adjusted himself in the bed, facing her directly. "I want a life where I can see my daughter grow up. I want to continue Elise's legacy through the foundation, and I want—" He hesitated briefly. "I want you by my side, Gabriella, not as Beatrice's tutor or the foundation's director, but as my companion." The declaration, although expected, at some subconscious level, caught Gabriella by surprise. Her mind raced, considering all the implications, all the possible obstacles. "Richard, You don't need to answer now," he gently interrupted. "I know there are complications. That our story didn't begin in the most conventional way. I know that Elise's shadow still hangs over us, and that the difference in age and social position may seem like an abyss. But I also know that I've never felt so alive as in the last few months. And that's thanks to you." A nurse came in to check Richard's vital signs, momentarily breaking the intensity of the moment. When they were alone again, Gabriella realized it was time to be equally honest. "I have feelings for you too, Richard, deep and real, but we need to think about Beatrice, about how this will affect her." "Beatrice adores you," he argued. "As her tutor, her friend. We don't know how she would react to seeing me as something more." Richard smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "I think we underestimate her perception. Beatrice asked me last night if I was going to ask Gabby to be my girlfriend, like the prince did with the princess." The morning of the Rainbow Foundation's inauguration arrived with an intensely blue sky, as if nature was celebrating along. Gabriella woke up early, after a night of restless sleep. The conversation with Richard at the hospital had deeply affected her, opening possibilities that before seemed like distant dreams. Beatrice was still asleep when Gabriella went downstairs to prepare breakfast. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Connie already busy with the final preparations for the inauguration reception. "How is the boss?" asked the housekeeper, without diverting attention from the appetizers she carefully arranged. "The doctors promised to release him this morning if the tests are normal. And you two? How are you?" The elderly woman's direct question made Gabriella blush. "I'm not sure, Connie. It's all so complicated." The housekeeper stopped what she was doing and faced Gabriella with her wise eyes. "True love always is, girl. If it was simple, it wouldn't be worth it." Before they could continue the conversation, Beatrice appeared in the kitchen, still in pajamas, her hair disheveled. "Will Dad be able to leave the hospital in time?" It was the girl's first question, revealing her main concern. "He promised." "He would, dear," replied Gabriella, hugging her. "Promises can be broken," murmured Beatrice, the hurt of past disappointment still present in her voice. Gabriella knelt to be at the girl's height. "Your father has changed. I sincerely believe he will do the impossible to be there today." The hours passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Helen arrived early to help, bringing with her journalists from an important newspaper that would cover the inauguration. Her presence was providential, as Gabriella needed to leave to pick up Richard from the hospital. Upon arriving there, she found him already dressed and anxious to leave, although he still looked weak. "The doctors recommended rest," she warned, concerned with his pale appearance. "I'll be fine," he assured. "This inauguration is too important to be postponed." On the way to the foundation, they talked about practical matters, avoiding the topic that had hung between them since the previous night. There was a tacit understanding that that wasn't the moment for personal decisions. The day belonged to Elise's dream that was finally coming true. When they arrived at the foundation, they were impressed with the transformation. The place was unrecognizable. Colorful banners decorated the entrance. Children's artwork adorned the freshly painted walls, and a small stage had been set up for presentations. Dozens of children were already circulating through the space, marveling at the artistic materials arranged at each station. Beatrice ran to hug her father as soon as she saw him. "You really came," she exclaimed, radiant. "I promised, didn't I?" replied Richard, lifting her in his arms, ignoring the fatigue. The inauguration ceremony was simple and moving. Richard gave a brief speech, thanking everyone who made that dream possible, especially Gabriella, whose generous heart and unwavering determination gave new life to a dormant project. The mention made Gabriella blush, especially when their gazes met with an intensity that didn't go unnoticed by those present. The most touching moment, however, came when Beatrice climbed onto the stage, holding a framed portrait of Elise. "This foundation was my mother's dream," she said with surprising eloquence for her age. "She wanted all children to be able to make art, even those who don't have much money. Today, thanks to my dad and Gabby, her dream is alive again." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Richard hugged his daughter, visibly moved. Gabriella joined, them forming a collective embrace that symbolized much more than a simple professional partnership. The afternoon passed with children's presentations, guided tours of the facilities, and much celebration. Richard, despite the evident fatigue, made a point of participating in everything, interacting with the children and their families with a naturalness that surprised even his old acquaintances. At dusk, when the guests began to disperse, Richard asked Gabriella and Beatrice to accompany him to the small garden at the back of the foundation. There, to their surprise, there was a wooden bench under a leafy tree with a golden plaque. "Elise Morrison Garden, where dreams bloom," I thought. "It would be an appropriate way to honor her," explained Richard. Beatrice hugged her father, moved. Gabriella kept herself a bit distant, feeling simultaneously part of that moment, and a respectful observer of something deeply intimate. Richard noticed her distance and extended his hand, inviting her to join them. Elise always believed that families are built by love, not just by blood, he said softly. She would love to know that Beatrice has you in her life. The words deeply touched Gabriella. It was like receiving a blessing she didn't know she needed. When they returned to the mansion, it was already night. Beatrice, exhausted by the day's emotion, fell asleep quickly. Richard and Gabriella found themselves on the veranda, under a starry sky similar to the night he had been hospitalized. The doctors were emphatic, began Richard, breaking the silence. I need to radically change my lifestyle. What do you intend to do? Asked Gabriella, noting the seriousness in his voice. I'm going to transfer the executive presidency of the development company to Anthony. I'll continue on the board, but without involvement in day-to-day operations. The decision surprised Gabriella. The company had always been the center of Richard's life, his most fundamental identity. Are you sure about this? Absolutely. I almost lost Beatrice because of my obsession with work. I'm not going to risk losing anything else, or anyone, he added, looking at her significantly. Gabriella took a deep breath, feeling it was time to face what was between them. Richard, about yesterday. I know I caught you by surprise, he gently interrupted, and I understand your concerns. About Beatrice, about Elise's memory, about what others will think. But we've spent months rebuilding lives. It's time we build our own. Gabriella felt her heart race. It was as if all the uncertainties that tormented her dissolved before the clarity of that moment. I'm afraid, she admitted, afraid of not being enough, of living in Elise's shadow, that one day you'll look at me and see only an echo of her. Richard moved closer, taking her hands in his. Gabriella, it was the resemblance that first captured my attention. I can't deny that. But it was the difference that won my heart. Your strength, your determination, your unique way of seeing the world and transforming it. Elise will always be part of my history, of our family. But you are not a substitute or a continuation. You are a new beginning. The words deeply touched Gabriella. She realized that during all those months she wasn't just helping Richard and Beatrice overcome the past. She was also finding her own place in the world, her own value beyond the roles she played. And Beatrice? She asked. How does she really feel about this? Richard smiled. Why don't we ask her directly? Both turned, surprised to find Beatrice standing at the veranda door, hugging her inseparable teddy bear, observing them with curious eyes. "Bea, how long have you been there?" asked Gabriella, blushing. "Long enough," replied the girl with wisdom beyond her years. "You're talking about liking each other, aren't you?" Richard and Gabriella exchanged embarrassed looks, but couldn't contain a smile. "Yes, Princess," confirmed Richard. "And we wanted to know how you would feel if Gabby were part of our family in a different way." Beatrice approached, thoughtful. "Like her stepmother, like in the stories." "Not exactly like in the stories," Gabriella quickly explained. "I would never try to replace your mother. Elise will always be your mother, the most important person in your life." Beatrice remained silent for a few moments, processing the information with the seriousness typical of children when evaluating important issues. "I already have a mom in heaven," she finally said, "but I think I can have a Gabby here on earth, too." The simplicity and depth of the response moved both Richard and Gabriella. Beatrice moved closer and took each one's hand, uniting them like a small celebrant. "Now you can kiss, like at the end of fairy tales," she declared naturally. Richard laughed, but his gaze met Gabriella's with a silent question. She responded by gently leaning in his direction. The kiss was brief, full of promises and possibilities. "I think this is the moment when we say, 'and they lived happily ever after,' isn't it?" joked Richard. "No," corrected Gabriella, smiling. "This is the moment when we say, 'and they began to build their happiness together, one day at a time.'" In the months that followed, the transformation in the Morrisons' lives was evident to everyone. Richard, away from corporate stress, dedicated himself to the Rainbow Foundation and social projects linked to the development company. Gabriella divided her time between directing the foundation, completing her master's degree and her new position in the family. And Beatrice flourished, surrounded by genuine love and attention. The mansion, once silent and cold, now vibrated with laughter, music, and the sound of hurried steps through the corridors. Elise's portrait remained in the living room, not as a ghost haunting the present, but as an ancestor blessing the future. On a sunny afternoon, exactly 1 year after the foundation's inauguration, Richard took Gabriella and Beatrice back to the lake house in Lake Geneva. At the same stream where years before he had proposed to Elise, he knelt before Gabriella. "I'm not asking you to replace anyone or to fill voids," he said, holding a small velvet box. "I'm asking that we create something new together, something that honors the past but that isn't defined by it. Gabriella Sanders, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" With Beatrice watching emotionally, holding the old teddy bear. As a witness, Gabriella responded with tears in her eyes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The family that was forming wasn't defined by blood ties or social conventions, but by daily choices, by small gestures of love, and by the courage to face the past without allowing it to dictate the future. Richard, Gabriella, and Beatrice knew that the path wouldn't always be easy, that there would be difficult days and obstacles to overcome, but they had the certainty that together they could face any storm. On the wedding day, held in the gardens of the Rainbow Foundation, Beatrice surprised everyone by climbing onto the small stage and declaring with her childish but firm voice, "Today is not just the day I gained a new mother. It's the day we all gained a new chance to be happy." Mom always said that true love has many forms, and today it has ours. At that moment, under the blue sky of Chicago, surrounded by friends, family, and the children from the foundation, Richard and Gabriella sealed not only their union, but also the promise of a life built on foundations of respect, understanding, and authentic love. A love that didn't erase the past, but that illuminated the present and opened paths for a future full of possibilities. And so, not with a definitive happily ever after, but with a daily commitment to build happiness together,